We're going to be taking the code that we just learned about in regards to adding elements into the DOM, and we're going to put that code into a function and incorporate it into our application. The first item that we have in our requirements for this section of the course is that we need to create an li element for every to-do item. So let's take a look at what we can do to accomplish that. Now, it is worth mentioning that in the last exercise, I placed a UL element into my HTML file. We're still going to need that there. We will need this to accomplish the next bit of code that we're going to be working on, so make sure that you have that. And in our script file, to accomplish this, we're going to create a new object. So down here at the bottom, I'm going to create a new object, and this object is going to go ahead and handle what the user is going to see on the page. So it's going to be responsible for anything that shows up on the page. This particular object is not going to have any logic per se. We're not going to be changing any data inside of our app. All it's going to do is take the information from our to-dos array and display it to the screen. So it's going to be responsible for displaying things on the screen. So we'll just go ahead and we'll call this object display. Just as we did before, I'm going to specify the name and I'm going to make it equal to a new object. And then what we'll do is we'll start off by adding some properties and values, and our first property, which ultimately will become a method, is going to be display TDs. Now, it is worth noting that we did use display TDs as a function on our handlers object, and we also used it inside of our TD list, but they are unique to those objects. So now we're creating a new method that's going to be unique to this object. So I'm going to go ahead and use the colon, and I'm going to set up a new function, and then inside the function we're going to start coding what we want to have happen. So the first part of this logic is going to be really similar to what we already did in the last video. We want to grab a reference to our to-dos UL, and we're going to be using query selector to do that. So let's go ahead and let's create a variable, and we'll call it tdul, and I'm going to make that equal to document.querySelector, and the element that we want to be querying is going to be our unordered list. So I'll pass UL into the parentheses. Then I'm going to create another variable, and we'll call this one tdli, and this is going to be equal to document.createElement, and the element that we want to be creating is going to be our li element. So we want to create list items. We want to create new to-do list items, and then we're simply going to use our append child. So what we need to do is we need to grab our tdul element, and we're then going to use our append child method, and we're going to insert the tdli into the tdul. So inside the parentheses here, I'm going to pass on my variable name of tdli. So as you can see, this code is pretty much exactly what we've done when we were working with the console in the previous video. If I come to the page and we refresh it, and right now, if I run the code, so I'm going to say display.displayTDs, you can see what happened. It went ahead and it inserted a bullet point onto my page. So if I was to run that again, we get a second bullet point. So this is working. It is working in a manual way, but it certainly is working. Now what we want to do is we want to make our display TD function smarter. We ultimately want to run this code for each item in our to-dos array. So because we want to go through and find out how many items are in our to-dos array, a for loop is going to allow us to do that. So what we'll do is we'll add a for loop into this object. So I'm just going to set up my standard for loop that we've been working with throughout the course, and the condition is going to be if I is less than my to-dos array length. So we can use the length property to get that, and then we'll go ahead and we'll increment I so it loops through this particular array so that we can go ahead and accomplish what we want to accomplish. All right, so now I have my for loop and it is encompassing the variables that we created right here. So this is going to allow us to loop through each item in the array. So now if I save the page and we refresh the page and we type our display.displayTDs, you can see that nothing happened, and that's because currently I don't have any items. So now if I add an item and we once again run our display.displayTDs, now the bullet point is going to show up. Now, if I run this again, I still only have one item, but what happens is you can see that it added a second bullet. And if I add a second item to my to-do list, now I have 2 items in my to-do list, and if I run my display.displayTDs command again, you can now see that it gives me 4 bullets. So ultimately, I should only have 2 bullets. And this is obviously a problem. What we need to do is we need our method to always reflect the number of items in our to-dos. Our displayTD method is not working in the way we ultimately want it to. It's doing exactly what we told it to do. It's always adding the number of items to the screen, but what we really wanted to do is we wanted to clear everything out. So it needs to clear everything that was currently there and start from 0 whenever we call displayTDs, because when we're calling displayTDs, the number of items may be different every time. So we need to make this a little bit smarter, and we need it to start from 0 every time we use it. So we're going to modify our code a little bit in order to accomplish this. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take our variable for our TDUL and we're going to pull this out of the for loop. So let's just cut that, and we'll have that appearing first before the for loop. We don't need to create this every single time inside of the for loop, so we'll move that. And then in order to ensure that we have 0 items in our unordered list, we're going to use the code of TDUL, which is the name of that variable, and we're going to use our inner HTML method, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to set this to just an empty string. This is going to make sure that we have 0 items inside of our unordered list. That way, we're not going to have any extra items that were previously there from a past request. We need to take our TDUL and we need to clear it. So we're going to grab the TDUL before we start adding elements to the DOM, and we're using the inner HTML property, and that's going to allow us to get whatever HTML is inside of the unordered list, and we're just going to set it to nothing. And this is going to clear out the unordered list before we start adding the li elements. So that should take care of our problem. I'll save this, and if we go back out to the browser and refresh, and I'm going to add a couple of items here to the page. So we'll add like 3 items. And now if we run our display.displayTDs, you can see that I'm getting an error message, and it looks like I did not capitalize my UL here. So let's take care of that. We'll save this. Let's try one more time. We'll refresh. I'm going to add in the items. So item 1, item 2, and item 3. And now if we run our display.displayTDs, you can see that I get 3 bullets. And now if I go ahead and I add an additional item and we run our display.displayTDs, we get 4 bullets. So now we've fixed this. It's now reflecting the number of items in our to-dos array. So our new display object is just responsible, as you can see, for what the user sees. It's just going to simply render the data that's on the screen. And that's what we want it to do. We want to render our to-do list data to the screen. So it's just going to grab the unordered list elements, and it's going to make sure that the unordered list element always starts at 0. So like if I come in here and I select one of my to-dos and I delete it, now you can see I've gotten rid of the second item. And if we run our display TD method again, now it goes down to 3 bullets. So it just grabs the unordered list element, it makes sure it starts at 0, so it's going to clear out any existing items, and then next what's going to happen is it's going to create a list item for each item inside of our to-dos array, and it just iterates through while I is less than the to-dos length. It'll continue to loop through. So for each item, it's going to create a new li element and append it to the UL that we have on our page. So this is now taking care of our first requirement. Now we're creating an li element for every element within our to-do list.